evening and welcome to this Farm Advisory Service webinar as part of the Sustainable Sheep Systems series. This one is called Two's Company, Threes Doesn't Have to Be a Crowd, and we're joined tonight by two brilliant guest speakers. We've got Poppy Frater, Sheep and Grassland Specialist with SAC, and we've got James Drummond of Lemmington Hill Head Farm down in Northumberland, who farms a beef and sheep farm. I'm your host tonight. My name is Daniel Stout. I work for SAC Consulting, and I'm also joined by my colleague Craig Bothwell in tech support. So tonight's webinar, it is the third webinar in the Sustainable Sheep Systems series, which I'll give you a bit of a brief later on about it. But tonight we're going to be discussing management practices for breeding new hogs, triplet bearing ewes, and rearing triplets on the ewes, so opportunities there. But how we can manage that to optimise performance and ultimately profitability, and look to reduce costs. We'll run for about an hour and a half, finishing at maybe 8:45, 9 o'clock. We're going to start with a presentation from Poppy Frater, followed by James Drummond, and we'll do questions at the end with hopefully plenty of time for a good bit of discussion. And we're going to kick it off with Poppy, so I'll pass it on to you, Poppy.
Thanks, Daniel. Okay, let's see if I can share my screen. Great. So yeah, thanks, Daniel. My presentation's on lambing, triplets and hogs. Just really to sort of address some of the negative comments about triplets. So things like that they rear fewer lambs than twinning ewes, they have a higher death rate, or that they wean tiny worthless lambs. But that needn't be the case. So we'll hear from James Drummond later, who shows like really good performance from triplet rearing ewes. And with hogs, they can be done badly, and that can impact their future performance. They can be a challenge to manage, but done well, you get a bonus crop of lambs, and in the subsequent year, you get a ewe with experience. So there's certainly benefits to be had when done well, but they're certainly challenging groups to manage. I am going to cover pre-lambing, so how we should treat these two different challenging groups in the lead up to lambing time, during lambing and post-lambing. So pre-lambing with triplets, they need to be managed separately from scanning, ideally. You can put some lean twins in with them and manage them separately. The reason being is that they require more energy. So this graph along the bottom just shows the triplets at the top, twins in the middle, and singles, and just shows how their energy demand starts to deviate in the lead up to lambing time. There is research to show that weight gain from scanning leads to heavier birth weights, which is significantly related to better lamb survival. And like I say, they require 10% more energy and protein in the last 7 weeks. They require nutrient density. So we talk about the impact of the growing fetus, as shown in this diagram at the top here. We talk about the impact of the growing fetus on the volume of the rumen. And with the single lamb, yes, that has an impact, but just consider with 3 lambs what impact that has. So for that reason, we really want to make sure that they get good energy density to meet their needs as their appetite starts to decrease in the lead up to lambing time. We'll hear from James, who shows it can be done those needs can be perfectly met with grass or herbal lays, providing they're above 4 centimetres, and providing the ewes in bold are in good condition. Alternatively, perhaps more conventionally, using high quality conserved forage plus good concentrates, as I'll show some examples in a moment. So just as an example, for say 70 kilo ewes, using a supplement, so a concentrate of a value of 12.5 ME. The top row on this table shows the ME requirements, 7 weeks, 5 weeks, 3 weeks, and 1 week pre-lambing. So it just shows that sharp increase as I showed on the graph earlier. Here you can see what that might look like in terms of a hay-based diet. So with hay as an average, it's around 8.5 ME. So those ewes would need supplemented from 7 weeks pre-lambing. So to meet that energy requirement with a 12.5 ME concentrate, you can see what sort of supplementation they would require. Alternatively, they could be fed at a flat rate in those 7 weeks. However, just to contrast, I've shown what the supplementation might be on a good silage, so an 11.5 ME silage diet. They would actually only need supplemented from around 4 to 3 weeks pre-lambing. And just to kind of hone back to the point I made about the decreasing rumen volume, you can see in this bottom diet, you're actually having to feed them, less bulk, and you're more going to be able to meet their energy demands much more efficiently, as opposed to a hay-based diet where the energy density is less. You're going to have to feed them a lot more to meet their energy requirements. So this is why I say an energy-dense ration, like the one at the bottom, is far better. On top of that, as soon as you start increasing concentrates above 1 kilo a day, you're risking acidosis. And I should say forage analysis is absolutely important to actually to formulate these precise rations. So thinking more on hogs, again, they should be managed separately. And hogs are a much finer balance because you want to make sure that they're growing through pregnancy. However, in the last 6-7 weeks, we don't want to overdo it because we can then end up with large lambs and lambing difficulty. So in this graph at the bottom, I've shown what the energy requirements would be for some hogs compared to mature fit twins. So they will require about 20% more in mid-pregnancy. However, in the last 7 weeks, they really shouldn't get any more than their mature counterparts. Particularly if you've got, if you put a big ram, particularly if you have not put a small breed across those hogs, you do want to really manage this fine balance carefully. During pregnancy, hogs should target to gain about 12 to 15 kilos. In this graph at the top, just a suggestion based on AHDB feeding the ewe. In the first 6 weeks of pregnancy, you should target 200 grams per day. From week 7 to 15, target 120, 125. And then the last 6 weeks, you really aren't targeting any growth in those hogs at all. So you can see what sort of weight you would target. So at the start of pregnancy, you're targeting 60% of mature weight, and then you're ending up around 80% of their mature weight. Again, nutrient density, absolutely. And like I say again, grass above 4 centimeters, providing ewes are in good condition, absolutely fine, herbal lays. And otherwise, high quality forage plus good concentrates. So just to show some examples of what they would look like, in the top, these are the energy requirements per day for those hogs in the lead up to lambing time on a hay-based ration. So that's what it would look like, and on a silage-based ration down the bottom. Some key issues for these two groups. Well, for triplets, prolapses can be an issue. For this reason, I would suggest not keeping them on root crops too close to lambing time. Root crops are associated with prolapses sometimes, particularly in those carrying more than 2 lambs. Sometimes it can't be avoided, and being ready with the harness, etc., to treat prolapses is required, and culling for those that have prolapse as well. Twin lamb disease can be an issue because it is such a fine balance to make sure that you meet their nutrient requirements, and it is so hard to get that nutrient density into triplets. So doing things like metabolic profiling with your vets, getting bloods tested 4 weeks pre-lambing just to check that their energy and protein demands are being met can help mitigate that risk. And giving them energy dense feeds. And then hypocalcemia, so lack of calcium as well, can be an issue. As you can see, it really is metabolic disorders that can be the problem with these groups with high demands. So making sure that they're given sufficient minerals at key times in the lead up to lambing time. I would say with any group, these are the standard advice. However, more so with these different groups, because they're so prone to issues. So introducing any concentrate feed slowly, so starting at no more than 1/4 of a kilo and increasing by 50 to 100 grams per day. I would say no more than 450 grams per feed. Okay, as you start extending that, you're risking acidosis, or you're affecting the rumen pH to a level where it can't digest the nutrients, the energy well enough. If you're supplementing with home mixes, whole grains, so barley whole is far better because it doesn't have such a sharp increase on rumen pH. And I would say the feed space requirements are absolutely important for these groups to making sure that they get what they want. So this is the sort of advice I would give across the board, but I'm saying this is far more important for these groups to make sure we target their nutrition well. And then finally, just pre-lambing time, just to kind of hone the mind as to what we're trying to achieve in terms of birth weights. So the 75% of survival for lamb birth weights is within 4 and 7 kilos. I would say triplets are more likely to be prone on the lighter end on the scale, so the emphasis should be on trying to feed them to increase birth weights, and that's where, like I say, feeding from scanning, managing for weight gain from scanning time is influential to this. Hogs, on the other end, the issue is them being too heavy in birth weights, so it's about managing their nutrition really carefully and really precisely in those last 6 weeks. So next up, I will discuss what to consider during lambing. So with triplets, the key issues, like I said, are small, weak lambs. So you do what you can nutritionally, and unfortunately, sometimes it's just with all the will in the world, you'll get some smaller, weak lambs. So do be prepared for these. So you know, in terms of managing weak lambs, in terms of sort of first aid, etc. And consider removing the lightest. The lightest ones are always going to struggle. It's the heaviest ones are going to get more of the milk, more of the colostrum. Ewes do produce more colostrum in twins than in singles, and they do produce more colostrum in triplets than in twins. However, it's not invariably not enough to feed all three, and often they will need supplemented. Colostrum is influenced by their condition in the lead up to lambing, but it's worthwhile having some as backup in case they don't have enough. And first point of call for colostrum supplementation is colostrum from a single with plenty of milk in the flock, or a good quality colostrum bought in. If that's not available, if that's not possible. The other issue with triplets can be this mothering. The ewe can count to 3, however, she's less likely to call after a lamb if it goes wandering, and it's more dependent on that wandering lamb returning to her. And that's why managing in small groups can help reduce this risk. And the other issue with triplets is they might take longer to lamb. So minimizing disturbance in the shed or outside, and providing, and indoors, and particularly making sure they've got plenty of space so that they're not disturbed too much during the process. With hogs, the key issues can be lambing difficulty. Again, so monitoring condition, precise rationing, looking at bloods in the lead up, and just preparation for having to intervene a bit more might have to be the case as a last resort, I should say. Another issue with hogs is they might abandon their lambs. It's all very novel to them. They're learning the processes, and that can be a very stressful experience. So making sure that you're again minimizing disturbance, providing them a space, and also managing them with the known ewes. Ewes like to be amongst their friends, and if they're constantly being mixed with other groups, that's stressful to them. It could be an issue. Could be colostrum intake. Their udders are more accessible to the lambs, But if the lamb's gone wandering, they're less likely to, and the maternal care side of their behaviour doesn't come as naturally to them as an experienced ewe. So checking their udders, check they've got plenty, and removing that waxy plug if their lamb hasn't suckled yet. And being prepared to supplement if needs be. So lastly, I'll just cover some considerations post-lambing. So there are, as I see it, 3 options for triplets. I leave 3 on, which is what James does. I would say top of the list is making sure they're in good condition. I would say this, consider creep feeding, particularly if grass is less than 6 centimetres, or multi-species swards, and providing magnesium or avoiding swards with heavy potash levels, as they can be more prone to grass staggers. And just put down the bottom there, a lactating triplet requires 40% more feed than a twin, so that absolutely should be the front of your mind when considering stocking rates. They can be fostered onto a single. It's more labour, but if done well, it can work out well. First and foremost, checking that the single's got plenty milk. And in this instance, I would say take the odd one out. So if there's one smaller or one larger than the other 2, then that's the one to choose to foster on. With wet fostering, works best. It's best to do it as close to the singles lambing as possible, or preferably just before, so that ewe's instinct is to lick that wet lamb, and it's more likely to be successful. And then finally, as a last resort, is orphan lambs. They are the most expensive option. In this case, I would take the smallest lamb, because that's the one that's going to have the hardest start amongst the 3. And with these, hygiene is critical, because lamb mortality can really ruin the cost, the benefit of rearing orphan lambs. Into lactation when it comes to hogs. I put a question mark, remove the second lamb. It very much depends on how well you do it. You'll hear from James successfully rearing twins on hogs. However, in other situations, it might be to your benefit just to not strain that hog too much through lactation. It's often that the hogs lambs are the tail end lambs, and maybe that doesn't suit your system. So removing the second lamb can help reduce that risk. Again, I would consider creep feeding if grass is less than 6 centimetres, and I would consider weaning earlier to give that hog more chance to regain condition before her second mating. I put this graph in the bottom here just to show what we're expecting from these replacement ewes through their younger years. So if lambing as a hog, you want to make sure they achieve 60% of their mature weight before tupping time, and around 75 to 80% of their mature weight at lambing time. Then once they've lambed, again, you want to keep that weight gain going up, ready for their next mating time. And this is where weaning just can buy in that little bit of extra time to help achieve this target. Now, finally, I think it's really important to review the success. Okay, we can talk about different options here, but if it's not working successfully for your farm business, then you need to review it, whether for one, managing triplets and hogs is worthwhile for you, or whether you need to tweak the management. I've just taken this. This is from one of our web pages, and it's a recording sheet, just a simple tally to record the losses of lambs, the causes of their loss, and then you can put the lambs carried, or even have a little indication of whether they're hogs there as well, just to help track whether the losses are more weighted towards the triplets and the hogs, and understand whether that's working well for you or whether tweaks are to be made. Is the loss outweighed by the additional revenue? And if not, yeah, considering reducing the scan or management tweaks. Along that side, I also would recommend reviewing the lamb performance. You can use, so ideally, weighing lambs through the season works really well, because it can help you understand how your management is working out in reality. we formulated a guide. It's available at the link shown here. You just if you Google farm stock and lamb weighing guide, it should show up. Based on weighing a sample of the lamb group, so 56 lambs, to calculate an average. And that's quite a nice pragmatic approach to tracking lamb growth rates. I would say important times to weigh lambs would be at 8 weeks to understand how well they've done during lactation, at around 90 days to understand basically for the remainder of lactation, and then at regular intervals when they've been drafted afterwards. But alternatively, if that's not something you wish to do, not everyone does, although there are benefits, you can also review the growth rates at the end of the season using your kill sheets. So this is another spreadsheet that's available on request. If you put in the date they're sold, how many days from lambing, the number sold, you can calculate what the average kilo dead weight was, the killing out percentage assumptions, and basically calculate what the live weight is at sale and what growth rate they obtained on average. You can also use this to track your lamb sales profile like this to help hone in on where management should be refined. And often you might find that the hog lambs or the triplet lambs are these tail end lambs at the end. I would encourage everyone to consider what the scanning sweet spot might be. This just shows as scanning percentage increases, what you can sort of expect in terms of triplets, twins, and singles. So you can see as you hit over the 200% mark, the triplets sharply and start to overtake the number of twins. If you're running a low intervention system, perhaps your scanning percentage sweet spot might be that bit lower. However, if you've got the labour, perhaps it's that bit higher. And again, we'll hear how it's done successfully at a high scan in a minute. And I would also just analyse whether lambing hogs is worth it for you. That first year can be worth, over £50 per ewe in terms of revenue. However, it can, well, there's still questions raised as to whether it might reduce their longevity or affect their maternal ability later on if it's not done very well. So there are risks there. And I would say it's dependent on your context. Your forage availability in the summer, sometimes having dry hogs on the farm can be a useful tool. Your labour at lambing time, how well it works for your system. And creep feeding, we will probably unpick this a bit more further on. Creep feeding is more than just the value of getting lambs away sooner and what sort of price they may gain. I've just taken this using the 3-year average price, the grey shaded region here, to kind of predict or analyse what we might expect if we creep fed a group of lambs born in mid-March. So say the baseline growth rates is 250 grams a day. I mean, that's possibly average. It's could be better at grass only. And the only way you really know this is through weighing. However, I've just put this as a sort of scenario as a base. So at that base lamb growth rate, they would take 140 days to slaughter on average. So go to slaughter at the start of August. And based on the 3-year average lamb price, they would generate 81.56. Those same lambs, if they were creep fed, might gain another 100 grams a day. Therefore, they might go to slaughter at the end of June rather than August. Based on 3-year average price, you might see another sort of 8 quid in difference there. However, that creep price can be expensive. Assuming intake of 300 grams a day, so that's 30 kilos of creep per lamb. That costs just under 8 quid. So really it pretty much breaks even. However, the other questions you need to ask, will there be further lamb health costs to cover if I don't creep feed in terms of worming, in terms of feet issues? There's the risk there. What's the ewe condition like at the moment? Is it better trying to creep feed to limit further condition loss and give her more recovery time? What's the feed supplies like on the rest of the farm? Are you better off trying to offload lambs that bit sooner? And are they prone to mastitis? So using creep feed can reduce the strain on their udders and reduce the mastitis risk. So that's me. Thank you very much. Just to give some considerations in terms of rearing triplets and twins. And I will hand over to one of the pros, James Drummond, to talk about how it's done in a low-cost way.
Thank you, Poppy. It was great. Certainly plenty to think about. We'll pass it over to James now, and we'll do questions at the end.
All right there, how are we getting on?
Good, how's yourself, James?
I think my screen might be able to share with any luck. We'll see how this goes. Can you see the screen there at all?
We can. I think you need to share a big screen.
You can see it, can you?
We can, but we're seeing it's not full screen. There we are.
Might be a bit of a delay. We've got that. Perfect. So lovely. So yeah, I'm going to carry on with the twos company. 3 doesn't have to be a crowd spiel for tonight. So yeah, what we're looking at, as Poppy touched on, is what we do rearing high multiples. So that's the ewes and the shearlings that are scanning as triplets or above, and also what we do here with our hogs. So our scan is not high, but we do end up getting triplets on the system, and it's not something I was really wanting to deal with through lifting a lot of animals, and I don't really have the empathy. I think empathy is the right word. You don't have empathy, you're a sociopath, aren't you? You don't have the desire to be rearing a lot of pet lambs. I've no inkling to have any at the end of the lambing. The goal is to have absolutely 0, so I don't want to be lifting lambs off ewes if I don't have to. So about 4 years ago, we started putting the ewes out with 3, and we've got on really well with it. So the main breed we've got, the Aberfield scanned at 197%. So inevitably with that sort of scan, you're going to get triplets there. And if I can leave them on, it's a lot easier for me, and I don't have the sort of the added management and the jobs and the cost of trying to rear them off the mother. So we don't really try to hold the scan back here at all, although we're forage focused and all sort of outdoors and pasture. I know some people may try and limit that scan a bit. Really what we do genetically here, we evaluate everything on farm. That all goes to the geneticist, feeds into the ABVs, and really to pull apart them genetics the best we can, the best of our ability. I don't want my management to be the limiting factor in what them genetics can do. If it's me that's limited the nutrition in front of them, that's limiting their performance, it's not the ewes' true genetic potential being expressed on farm. So we'll make sure she can keep her body condition score on a forage-based system. That's absolutely key to what we do here. And then we'll evaluate them genetics on that system. So if them ewes are able to constantly produce triplets and rear triplets, that's great for them. Say that averages, well, this year was 197% the A flock. There's ewes that are constantly doing above that. There's ewes that are constantly doing below that. That data spent the geneticist, and it's up to them to produce the EBVs. And then people buying our lambs or buying stock, some want to reduce the scan, some want to rear it. We've evaluated how them genetics can do, and them EBVs pull apart what them genetics on farm can do. So we've also just started doing another couple of breeds, which I think has cemented my need to be quite good at rearing high multiples. We started doing Abatex a few years ago. We AI'd them this year, so you're messing around a bit with PMSG and synchronizing and everything. So it sort of is a bit artificial, I suppose, the scan. But them ewes scanned at 230%. Overall, so the ones not in the AI program as well, scanned at 225. That is up on previous years where it's been natural. We've been looking around that sort of 212%, I think the ewes did last year. But we've then gone and put a quite effective polyphacy gene into that line as well, which is going to rear about 0.6 of a lamb more having that gene in that base texel flock that we have. So we're going to have to get used to having quite high scans and be able to manage them animals. I mean, them Aberdale shearings got this year did 250% mated on dirt, negatively flushed, and they're still scanning high. So it's up to me really to try and have a system on farm that we can deal with them triplets. And I say we've been doing it for about 4 years now. We're finding we're getting on quite well with it. Learning process, sort of few things we've tweaked along the way. But I suppose I'll share a few things that we found and how we manage it to make it a bit easier for us. So infrastructure's quite an important one for us. We subdivide quite a lot here for our rotational grazing, but actually having them smaller paddocks is really handy for the high multiples at lambing time. So we're catching everything at birth. They're getting all the tagging, the performance recording and everything done. So actually we've got a hand on them lambs. We can see if the lamb's doing well enough on mum, if she's going to be able to keep the 3 on, or if we're going to have to lift. If we do lift, we tag and then, yeah, wet foster onto a single. We would rather put everything out. The vast majority we are putting out, but if there's a poor lamb there, or the ewe's not going to have the ability to rear 3, she will get 1 lifted. And 4s we generally lift as well, and we'll wet foster 1 on, easiest way. And I say it's quick and simple. Tag recorded the ewe, wet fostered on, and then taking the foster details there, so we know genetically who she's actually linked to, or that lamb's linked to. So the infrastructure is quite handy. We start putting them out in quite small mobs. I think Poppy touched on it, trying to keep the mob size down, especially in them triplets. It's quite handy. I mean, it's all right thinking, oh, well, I've got a 15-hectare field and I'll just whack 50 in there with 3, but inevitably the sheep, they're all going to hunt under what, 20 meters of hedge line, or they're all going to go under that one particular tree. So they're going to get mismothered. So actually having them smaller paddocks, we're looking around that 2-hectare sort of size. They're split up, they've got the water infrastructure in place. We'll start putting about 15 ewes with the 3 lambs in them paddocks, and then say a couple of days later or the next day we start filling another paddock, and so on. We've actually gone around the farm. We've got sort of 5 or 6 blocks now that are split up into these 2-hectare paddocks of about 4 or 5 paddocks in each bit, just where fields used to be, and we've split up permanently, mainly with Clip-X. And they're quite handy because you can fill a few of these with 50, and then actually after a week old you can start combining some of them. And so we'll combine to about 30 ewes with 3 on a 2-hectare paddock, and we'll try and leave them at that for sort of 2 or 3 weeks really, before actually mobbing up and properly getting into the rotation there. And we find that works quite well, especially that sort of first few days when they are very young, that our sort of day naught, sort of a day old, they're out there eating pasture and doing their thing. So if you've got too many and they're getting mismothered there, it's a bit of a pain. So it's a lot simpler for us. We'll go around in the morning and the night checking them. One thing management wise we do, so the pictures you've got here, the top right and the bottom left are hog twins. The top left and bottom right are triplets. Any twins get 2 numbers put on them. Any triplets get 3. Still got dodgy fences on farm, not quite got around to replacing them all yet. Ewes will inevitably push through fences or hedges and through dikes to get to another field. So actually if they're pushed through and they're in a mob of twins, we can identify that ewe or them lambs being in the wrong paddock, just having them 3 numbers. Simple thing to do. And again, any single just gets a letter, so you know 1 digit is a single, 2's a twin, 3's a triplet, and it's just quite easy, quick identification that way. And yeah, we get on quite well with them. So they're having that few-day rest, few days, just sort of 15 of them. They do sort of settle, and it's amazing how well they do learn just to stick with the 3. You'll get the odd one that will wander off for 2, and I suppose just like looking your twins, you'll get the odd lamb you have to pick or take the mother back to. But it's amazing, they do get used to having 3 lambs to look after instead of 2 quite quickly. One thing we found the first year, we had a bit of a problem with mastitis. A few in the triplets, more so in the hog twins. So the first year we sort of thought, all right, we'll keep 2 on the hogs because don't want to lift these things. Out of 100 odd with twins that year, we maybe got 10 with mastitis. So that was going to be a major issue. We thought, we can't do this if we're going to end up having to cull 10% because of our management here. So what we've actually started doing now is making sure them little paddocks are going in have got good pasture cover, so just good rest period, leading up to lambing time, good pasture cover there, and actually we're putting a bit of feed into them animals as well, so there are no twin, single, and gets any feeds during lactation. Lambs don't get anything apart from these mobs, the triplets and the hog twins. So a little bit of feed goes into mum for the first 3 or 4 weeks. I think mastitis is just more of a nutritional thing if it's under stress. And again, them lambs pulling a lot off the mother as well. So we're all pasture based here, and it all seems a bit naughty, but we started putting a bit of creep out a couple of years ago at about 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks of age, just till 8 weeks. So really, we're looking at that peak lactation on the ewes. And we still want them all to be pasture-based in our system. And that's probably not the best way. And actually, one of the easiest ways is probably, especially what Poppy looked at there, that if you're looking at a £7.90 cost for creeping them lambs right through the finishing, it's potentially a very good system to have for these animals. But we still want to be pasture-based. So we just use it as a tool to try and reduce the mastitis. So a little bit of feed into the ewes and then a little bit into lambs. I mean, out of just over 500 lambs from hog twins and from the triplets last year, I used 2 ton of creep, so it came in, I think it was £1.10 per lamb. The feed that goes into the ewe was about £3.20, I think, per ewe. So a ewe with 3 lambs, you're looking at £6.50 a hog. You're looking at sort of £5.50. So it's quite a low cost for having that extra animal, especially if you're going to have it on an orphan lamb system, you're going to be rearing it as a pet and all the hassle and the cost that goes into that. We do, being pasture focused, try and sort of just use that as a management tool to mitigate the mastitis, and it's worked really well. The last few years been doing that, next to no mastitis on these groups, so it's been very successful. And I think that goes alongside having the plenty of pasture cover, and we use quite a lot of herb legume lays as well, and that helps just keep the quality of feed going into them, and especially years when we get a bit of drought, we can maintain that pasture quantity in front of them a bit better as well, having these multi-species swards. And we do play around with them quite a bit. Here's us playing, or other people playing on one of our paddocks as part of a trial. So we've done a few trials over the last couple of years looking at hogs and their rearing performance on multi-species swards. This one is a ADAS run project with the Super G project, Horizon 2020 project they've got going on farm, a 5-year trial looking at the persistency and performance of different mixes, both in terms of sort of plant biology, diversity, grazing preference, but also the performance of the animals there as well. And we did trials previous years as well, looking at different mixes. So a couple of years ago with 4 farmers, we had a block of grass, same mix including a bit of chicory, same mix including a bit of plantain, one including chicory, plantain and sandfoin. And in that we saw an improvement from the grass based mix and the hog singles doing 350 grams a day, 360 when you included the chicory, 380 when you included the plantain. The whole hog, when you had the chicory, plantain and sandfoin in there, we were getting 390 grams a day to 8-week weights off them hog singles. So we're seeing benefits then in having some preference to their grades and that plant diversity. We'll look at more sort of the ecological benefits in this study here. Pictures are basically cutting away in exclusion cages, so we can actually do biological assessments within and outside of their cages. So we're looking at grazing preference as well as animal performance on these trials. And we can see an improvement in the first year data from this trial of some of these mixes. So the inclusion of sandpoint and especially the bird's foot trefoil, which are the two things we're looking at in this particular trial, we saw an improvement in the live weight gain of them animals. And that resulted in an improvement in the overall live weight gain per hectare on them blocks as well. So we're these, I think we varied from about 15 to 17 hogs per hectare plus a lamb on top of that. So quite a decent sort of stocking density, but these were set stocked on the trial blocks until 8-week awaits, and then we could get that data. So yeah, getting that, and this was no other feed going in these at all. Like the hog singles, this is just getting nothing leading up. They're on silage, they come off their KO block this particular year at scanning. They remain on dirt, so on the KO block, just with no KO in front of them, getting silage, and then they got some DUP blocks in the last 3 weeks. That was the only additional supplementation they got with them DUP blocks in the last 3 weeks of lambing. As soon as they're rearing, they're getting nothing but pasture. So we can look at the live weight gain performance of them lambs. We can also look at how that live weight has changed in the hog and also the body condition score. So actually these herb legume lays, we do see them having quite a good benefit in being able to maintain condition better. Historically on farm, when we've looked at performance of animals, especially if you're looking at say twins, if you looked at them on a permanent pasture basis, like rough gorsey stuff, you looked at a decent clover grass lay, if you looked at an all singing all dancing lay, you wouldn't see much difference in the live weight gain of the lamb in that period from lambing to 8 weeks. Essentially, if mum's getting nutrition, which a twin can get enough from any sort of pasture to be able to milk to her full potential, she should be able to get the full potential of live weight gain from her lambs. So actually the live weight gain doesn't change too much. What we do see is less of a body condition score drop on them higher quality pastures. And like we see here, we're keeping that condition score fairly decent in them hogs grazing these pastures. And as Poppy touched on earlier, one of the things about mating your ewe lambs, and the problem we found initially when we started doing it 7 or 8 years ago, we didn't make a good enough job of it. So we weren't getting the live weight gain required in them hogs whilst they were wintering when they were pregnant. We weren't doing a good enough job when they were rearing, and that was having a knock-on effect on hitting growth targets for mating them as a shearling, which ultimately knocked our scanning performance then as a shearling. We didn't quite have the genetics in place then. We're using cross-Suffolk ewes mainly as our sort of main commercial ewe. Problem we had then, they weren't a maternal ewe. They were great rams we were buying for terminal traits, but as a crossbred ewe, they weren't really performing for us. But we've changed genetics since then. We've changed the system quite a bit at Taylor, and actually now we are seeing the better a hog performs, the better she performs in later life. So there's more than just that economic benefit of mating your hogs. There's actually a benefit there in terms of improved performance and improved mothering ability as well of them animals. So a bit of data here just from the challenge sheet project that we're part of. So the top chart, we can see the blue bars are year one. So this was predominantly all ewe lambs in the project. The second year, the orange, we were sort of half shearlings, half ewe lambs, and then actually the grey, that was shearlings and ewes in the project. So the main reason for looking at this was actually when you looked in the first year when we're all hogs in the project, you can see that how the graph lies, the average weight was a lot lower for them. Obviously, you're going to get lower weights coming out of your hog lambs. The second year when it was ewe lambs, and the shearlings has obviously improved an awful lot more this year when we're looking at shearlings and ewe lambs. So there's something you need to be aware of your mating hogs, is that actually you need to be able to give them a bit of preference, and that you're not going to expect them to be quite as good at performing as your ewe. Some of the other data we've collected from this project, again, is looking at the importance of body condition score at key points in the year, and actually the knock-on effect that has. And it's going to be quite an important project, I think, for the industry going forward, what they'll do with challenge sheep. And there's a whole sort of array of farming systems taking part. There's 12 farms, all different systems, different genetics, different breeds in use. But it's looking at how you treat your replacements, that first breeding, and actually what the knock-on effect is in later life. So as Poppy sort of touched on earlier, actually what are you getting from mating your ewe lambs? So we've scanned 500 odd lambs in this year. If we get 80% survival, you've got 400 lambs. That economic benefit, what, 7,500? So you've got £30,000 worth of lambs there. So that's an added sort of economic benefit, I suppose, we've got in our system, especially breeding our own replacements. Them animals were there anyways. But then you've got to look at the other benefits that brings. So we were wintering them animals anyways. They were getting taken through winter on crops. If we didn't make them, we still had that cost. If we make them and we can rear, we've got more mouths on the ground. Say at 8% survival, there's 400 extra lambs on the ground there to help us utilise our spring growth. So when we're looking at sort of peak pasture performance, we've got more animals there to try and utilise that grass and sort of turn that into growth and into cash as effectively as possible. But the other benefits that you get are, say, improved maternal ability. So we'll see them being a lot better the next year as a shearling. And so when we first started doing them, we didn't quite think, didn't go as well as sort of they do now. We didn't really have the growth going through the winter. We didn't put them on brassicas through the winter back then. They were just on grass and silage. We weren't really getting good enough growth with them being pregnant. Going into the brassica system has definitely helped us improve the growth rate. Leading up to point of lambing, actually what we do with herb legume lays helps quite a bit as well, maintaining that condition and getting the growth when they're rearing. So now we're hitting our targets at mating as a shearling in terms of body condition score and weight. And what we're now seeing with the data we've collected on the farm and with the geneticists that we use within the breeding program at Innovis is the better them animals perform as a hog, the better they perform in later life as a ewe. So we'll put ours out with 2, quite happy with that. And actually when we look at that performance, them and the improved fertility from them higher scanning hogs, that effect is reflected in their scanning as a shearling and in later life as a ewe. So them animals are performing better. And did a report quite a few years ago for Nuffield, and part of that and what got me into actually rearing hogs and trying to do a good job of it was looking at your improved lifetime performance. So getting these systems right, you can have a more productive flock going forward. You can identify more fertile individuals and you can improve the growth and the rearing percentage of your flock from that hog performance. So a little bit of a look sort of how we've done the last couple of years. We dropped back a bit in performance last year from what we'd had the previous 2019 sort of reflected how them high rearing ones, so the hog twins and the shearling and ewe triplets had done the previous few years, but then last year we had dropped down a bit. But we can see the sort of the birth weight, the daily live weight gain to 8 weeks, and the weaning daily live weight gain that we're getting there, and ultimately what sort of size lamb we're ending up with. And this is an average for the whole group. There's obviously a variation within that group, and it does vary quite a bit. But having that ability to put them out with 3, we can really see who our good performers are. And you get some phenomenal performance from some of these. I had a ewe this year that I got a couple of ram lambs retained for stock sires because she'd reared 14 lambs in 5 years. And this year, I think she'd weaned 168% of her body weight at 90 days. So just phenomenal performance, repeated year after year. And I think the only year she managed to do as well as that is when she was a hog twin, because some of them hogs that you can get them doing what 2 lambs at 450 grams a day, like they can absolutely beast it. There's obviously quite a lot of demand there on the mother themselves, and so that's why we have to make sure we've got a system in place that we're going to mitigate the risk of mastitis and other issues that could come up from that. But if you're got hogs that are able to perform like that, you've got ewes that are doing 1.4 kilograms a day of growth, rearing 3 lambs. That's just absolutely tremendous to be able to have the ability to identify them ewes, and again be able to identify them genetics to help carry the breeds going forward as well. But yeah, as we sort of saw when I started looking at it, I knew it'd been a bit harder this year, but then I sat down and started looking at this data for the meeting. It actually showed sort of what we had been knocked back at this year, and it's still not too bad a performance really for triplets there. But you can see the ewes are back to sort of 328, sort of 40 kilos or 40 grams a day back. The shearlings were probably a little bit further back. A couple of reasons sort of identified for this. As a big love of the herb legume lays, actually them blocks that we had split up quite nicely for rearing these higher multiples on. The herb legume content had dwindled quite a bit this year. They were in the sort of the 4th year of lay. They were more grass dominant, so they've not got quite as high a quality feed going into them animals. The other problem we had, which we saw more, I think, in the data here in the ewes and the hogs, because the hogs lamb a little bit later, was actually we had quite a bad drought here. We didn't really have any rain after 2nd or 3rd week of March to speak of for about 3 months. So with being a lower herb legume content, then pastures were affected a bit more by the drought that we were in. So actually when we started looking at them 8-week weights coming in at the beginning of June, that was when we were really starting to sort of dry up and burn off around the farm. Where we were performing well was the herb legume lays, still growing well, a bit more drought tolerance. Actually, these lays that are now more grass dominant were starting to slow down a lot in growth, and actually were burning off in certain parts of the farm. The hogs didn't see quite as big an effect as that. They were lambing a cycle later, so actually we got some rain and things started to pick up, which is why there wasn't too much of a difference really in the live weight gain to weaning this year, as we had seen previously in them hog twins. But as I say, they are going to be the lighter end, and they are the ones that need a bit more management. But I would still rather do what I'm trying to do now than go into a sort of orphan pet lamb system. One thing I thought was quite interesting is what Poppy touched on in the creep system. Actually, I'm approaching this completely as being still forage focused. I wanted it all to be finished on forage. I just used the feed as a sort of tool to try and mitigate the risk of mastitis, so that I'm not having a higher cull rate and losing breeding ewes from my system. But we're just supposed to say 500 lambs, couple of tons, so yeah, £1.10 a lamb. That little bit of feed that was going in the ewes, it's quite a cheap system. Actually, if you then stuck with creep on a system, if you didn't want to re-put our costs into the herb legume lays, I quite like fencing, or paying for fencing both, but I quite like having these herb legume lays. Fits in my system. If that's not for you, but you would rather have them on grass in that creep system, if Poppy is looking at £7.90 that actually was mitigated by the improved day live weight gain, selling them earlier, and she was still looking at quite a heavy sale weight, if you drop that down to light lambs going away even earlier in the system, you could probably have quite a profitable system, putting some creep into them, and it's going to be an awful lot more profitable than having a pet lamb system, and a lot less hassle than having to faff on and lift. And I say I quite like to push the performance of the stock I've got here to see what I can do. So we've got 330 hogs to lamb this year. I've got more of them scanned and twin than I do singles. So we have to be set up to be able to rear these high multiples. and we're not really seeing any negative effects of doing it, apart from, say, taking a few bags of creep out for a couple of weeks. That's the only sort of added workload we've got. And I think the most satisfying mob of sheep to look in the evening is the triplets. They're a pain in the arse when they're not mothered up, but more often than not, they're mothered up quite well. And actually, if you're driving into a paddock of 30 triplets that are all bouncing around, sitting with mum, happy as anything, all mothered up, like, it's a nice paddock to drive through, and probably one of my favourite. And I think some of the best mothers on farm are them hog twins. As Poppy said, you can get a little bit leery to start off with. You can have some of them a bit hinged, they're not quite sure what's going on, but once they've settled down the fact that, like, they're a mum now and they know what's going on, they make absolutely cracking mothers, and they're the worst ones on farm to start mobbing up. When we start putting them together about a week of age, they will headbutt the dogs, they will fight the bike. They're the worst ones to start getting on the rotation. They soon get to it, but they just want to stamp and just protect their lambs. So we get on well with the maternal breeds we've got here. There's a lot of good maternal breeds out there. I wouldn't be put off going for as high a scan as you can and trying to push the output from your system if what was putting you off was triplets and the hog twins, because you can leave them on, you can deal with them. I think the hog twins last year were running at about 12% losses. Like, we had tremendous performance from them. Probably touched on a bit earlier, I think it was 4 to 7 kilos having the majority of the lambs. So we've seen on farm actually hitting them weight targets is quite important for your survival. I think between 3.75 kilos and 6.25, we have over 90% of our lambs in that band, but only half of our losses at lambing time. So over half of our losses come from the 10% of lambs that lie outside of that, and they will generally be things that are too big, things that are too small. One thing we sort of cocked up when we first did the hogs was we were giving a bit of feed to them hog singles. You're just getting big lambs and lambing difficulties, dystocia, losses. Just stop feeding them. Like, there's plenty of colostrum on them, milk really well. You see the live weight gain we're getting on them hog singles. Don't need to put a thing in them. So silage, but a bit of DUP in the last 3 weeks. No need for feed at any point of them. And absolutely cracking performance of hog singles. A little bit more management for them hog twins, and you can still get decent enough live weight gain. And yeah, if you want to keep feeding, put a bit more concentrate into them, and you can probably get them off farm fairly quick if you're hitting a light lamb market in June, July time with them. I'm sure you get a cracking trade for them. So yeah, going forward, personally, I'm focusing on this type of feed. Poppy's memories make me think if I should just put a creep into them hog twins, especially because they're just weather lambs. There's nothing to do with the breeding program there. That is a potential, especially I suppose in a drought year, if we can see that happening again as being short of pasture. That is a management tool to quickly get quite a few lambs off farm. But for now, my main drought tolerance is in diversity, which I'm going to keep trying to push that. I'm not entirely sure how long we've been rabbiting on now. I think that's about half an hour. So I will hand you back, unless there's anything in particular, Poppy or Daniel, anyone wants me to talk about.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much, James. It's certainly given us lots to think about. We've got a whole pile of questions, so we'll invite Poppy back as well.
That was great. Thank you, James. And
No
I'm glad
worries.
you agreed with me for a few things. So
I don't think there was something when you said it, and I need to disagree with that, but I don't know if I wrote it down. There was something.
Oh, really?
There was a lot of points. So metabolic profiles, yeah, that 40% more feed. I didn't realise, but that, yeah, good pasture cover. So we put that a little bit of concentrate in them, but just having good pasture. I say when you drive around the farm at night, like, it's amazing how many of them triplets. You think they're all lame when you first year, like, crap, something's happened to my ewes, but they're just lying there and they're just as far as their neck can stretch in front of them, just graze grass. Everything's sitting there at about 8 centimeters, and then they've taken it to the floor. And you look around, there's just these patches everywhere. They're just content. They're not having to walk around trying to find feed. They can just sit there, bond with the lambs, eat, and they're not constantly walking a paddock trying to fill their bellies. I think that does play a big part in actually helping the survival of these.
Yeah. And you're having them at lower stocking densities than with the triplets. What did you say, 15 per hectare, did you say?
Yeah, so we're about that. We'll put about 15, so that most blocks are about that sort of 2 hectare size. So I generally start sort of just after they've lambed. We'll put them in at about 15 to 2 hectares.
Okay,
And we'll try and leave them in them little paddocks. It depends how thick and fast they're coming, at least for sort of 4 or 5 days, maybe. And then we'll mob them up to about 15 per hectare. So we'll put 30 in a sort of 2 hectare paddock, and we'll leave them at that probably for 3 weeks until we try and get a rotation going with them. Basically, we whack them together when I start putting a bit of creep in, which is generally 3 or 4 weeks, because I've only got like 4 creep feeders. And I need that for all my triplets and all my hog twins. So they get 2 each, so they get mobbed up then, and we just chuck two feeders in a paddock, and they'll rotationally graze then, and we'll just move them 2 feeders around with the group.
right.
So we
Daniel.
want drift lambing, Poppy. Say, well, James is saying quite a high stocking rate. That say you're going to keep them in the same field for a month. What would be kind of a go-to stocking rate then? Depends on how much grass you've got.
If they weren't drift lambing?
Yes.
Oh, right,
So
sorry.
you set stocking, say, for the first month after lambing. What would be a kind of go-to stocking rate?
For triplets?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so that was like 7.5 ewes to the hectare roughly, wasn't it? Yeah, because it's over 2 hectares. Yeah. Depends on when you're lambing, I guess, what the grass is doing. But yeah, I would say less than 10 anyways to the hectare, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's having that pasture cover there. If you can keep the target good pasture cover in front of them, and when we're putting them on these sort of diverse lays, even say last year the herb legume content had dropped down, we still had very productive grass and white clover left there, and a bit of plantain. So you're still getting quite good pasture growth, especially when you're looking. This is sort of into sort of like end of April, May. So we're expecting good grass growth really from these younger lays at that time of year.
Lovely. Poppy, we've got a question here about the kind of flat rate versus grading up, feeding pre-lambing. What is the impact there? Can you have issues with twin lamb if you're really as such underfeeding energy in that last few days?
It's a tricky one because actually you're getting quite risky when you're going above a kilo as well, and you can actually end up with twin lamb when you're going above a kilo because the rumen pH is impacted, and then they're not extracting the energy from the forage very well. So I would actually say when you're getting to far above a kilo, flat rate feeding is probably healthier for them. Yeah.
Would it impact lamb size? Roughly. Would the result be the same?
I mean, they're getting the same amount of feed overall. So what you're doing is you're taking the amount of feed that they should get to meet their energy demands, but you're averaging it out, giving them the same amount, but they're getting a lower amount in the last few weeks. So I wouldn't say, I don't know, to be honest with you, but I don't think it would.
Yeah, because some of them sort of quantities you're on about, 1.1 kilos. If you've got, let's say, we're having them use 4.1 or something, I think we worked out we're average. You've got 12 kilos of lamb. If you're putting in a kilo of cake, and it might have to be 3 sittings for that, there's quite a lot. And if you've got a fit ewe as well, because she's been on cake for 7 weeks, like you're looking for a lot of things to get pushed out of the back end of a ewe.
Absolutely. That's why
could be getting some problems,
hay-based rations, low energy forage-based rations are really tricky to do to get that energy density into them. Yeah.
We're changing our system this year, so we were putting them on a concentrated system, the triplets. But yeah, you're just asking for problems with prolapses. Last year, we fed for a couple of years the hog twins some feed. So again, like the hog singles, once they've eaten their kale, they stay on that field behind electric, just in a twin mob and a single mob, getting silage, and we were feeding the twins. Started about 4 weeks out. After about a week, got a few prolapses. So sod this, just put them on the DUP like the singles. Absolutely fine. Like birth weights weren't bad at all in it. What we're moving to this year is just getting them on a grass rotation leading up. So the problem is now, because the scan, I put all my triplet ewes were getting a bit of feed and high quality silage. Now just going on the grass rotation, putting a little bit in there. So we're 3 weeks out from the earlies. We're doing a bit of embryo and AI and stuff last week of March. So we pulled them out at the end of last week, put them on the grass rotation, leans triplets, got on with 250 grams a day. And that's my plan now. A little bit, just gives them the minerals, say that you're going about the density of the feed availability, but we've got high quality pasture, and just supplementing with a little bit, because we know after lambing them triplets will be on something, so actually it's quite good just getting them used to that in the room, and now just don't want to be giving them much of it. The pasture is good enough, and it's just a little supplement on the pasture we're looking at them, and it's what the Hogg twins will start doing in 3 or 4 weeks as well.
Yeah, because that pasture, I mean, you'll have had it analysed, it'll be probably 12.5 ME, 12 ME, is it?
Yeah,
So,
start looking at the proteins. And we did wet chemistry last year, was it a couple of years ago, on the herb legume base. It can be up to 32% protein. So actually, the concentrate we've got is like, I want your shittest, lowest protein concentrate, because we don't need to supplement any protein at all on spring grass. As you say, it's just getting a bit of mineral and some ME in them.
yeah.
On that note, James, we've got someone asking a feed value comparison, but between the ryegrass clover sward versus the herb legume lay.
Yeah, so we do get higher protein content early on. So spring grass is rocket fuel. So say, like, even if it's pretty crappy, rushy, what looks like a terrible feed, like the grass that's in there will be very good. It's still spring grass. It's not got a head or dying leaf or anything there. If you're grazing it at a quality stage, that is going to be really good feed. The feed quality of the herb legume lays is later on, I suppose, a bit of a get out of jail free card for grazing management. They maintain their quality and growth a lot better into the season. Grass, I suppose, when you try to manage that during peak production, is sort of just going for broke at some points of the year, especially sort of we find the younger ryegrass lays we put in, like get into June around this part of the world, sort of first, second week of June, generally they just want to put up a seed head. So there's a lot of management to try and maintain the quality then. We don't see that on the herb legume lays as much, and they'll put up a seed head all the way through the year. Like plantain will graze the seeds off them probably 10 times in a season, but it's keeping the quality there, and it's keeping the quantity right through the season and production as well. So we do find them good for maintaining the quality. That grass, if it's sort of gone to a seed head, really gone boom, that you've got a lot lower quality feed then that you've then got to try and manage. Generally here, conserved forage or people will top, but that's where you get more issues really, is in that sort of ranker grass that's got ahead of people.
Because that plantain seed head isn't reducing the quality as much as like a seed head in grass, is it? So
oh no, and it's very palatable as well. They'll eat it. Chicory's not quite as much, but then we just didn't want to touch chicory for the first few years, but we did some trial plots a couple of years ago and thought, actually, it's not too bad to manage. So we're sticking it in the mix now, and no issues with it really. We're grazing that fine. But our plantain will, yeah, it's amazing how often it puts up a seed head. But yeah, really soft. They'll graze a leaf, they'll take the seeds off the top, then they'll eat the rest of that stalk, and yeah, there's not be a drop in quality in the plant or from eating that stalk.
We've got a couple of questions on that front about persistency. So we know you can get higher production, or particularly with these triplet hogs on this kind of forages. What's the persistency there for the cost benefit as well? If it's gone in 2 years, does it pay? Do you have a good sward afterwards?
Yeah, so when I started putting it in, I went for plantain clover because the Kiwis did it and it looked great. They have sprays in their arsenal to keep weed grasses and stuff out. We don't, and I don't particularly want to be putting a herb legume layer and then thinking, oh, I'm going to go spray it. Kind of defeats the purpose of having diversity in these sort of lays on farm. but inevitably, yeah, some things aren't going to last. We get on quite well with plantain here. We do find, like, yeah, 4th year, you've still got all right plant counts. Actually, as we're getting better at tailoring the mixes, I think that will last longer. Some things we grow, they're basically just biannuals. The Sanfoin, you're not going to get a long time. We see good benefits in putting it in the mixes. But some of the reasons we've got these trials with Paul down at ADAS, these Super G projects looking at the Bursford trefoil, is we think them condensed tannins that we get in Sanfoin, we're going to get the same benefits from the Bursford trefoil, but hopefully a lot better persistency. And so far, it's looking like persistency is quite good in this species, and you do get a lot of benefit from having condensed tannins in these mixes. We're finding everything that dies gets post-mortem. We're getting a fair bit of intestinal torsion on some of these lays. You get it badly in red clover. Any high quality forage that are just through them, like the day live weight gain flies up, but the risk of torsions does as well. Having the condensed tannins in there reduces the frothing in the rumen, it reduces the torsions, actually nearly eliminates it completely. But there seem to be the things that don't last quite as well in the swards. But as I say, when we first put them in, we didn't put any grasses in the plantain mix. When it died out after sort of 4 years, you just had what wheat grass had filled in the lay, so you had to go in with a reseed. Now we're putting it in with productive grasses, so you might have an all singing, all dancing lay for 2 or 3 years. You might then get a year or two of some herbs and some legumes over sort of clover being in your ryegrass sward, and then you're back to sort of a ryegrass, white clover sward. But if you're putting good productive grasses in there, you've not got that reseed cost at the end. And I say there might be a transition from a couple of years really all singing, all dancing to year 5 or 6 being really a ryegrass clover sward, but there'll be benefits in between. But at different farms are different. So we do get on well with the plantain. If you look in our hedgerows, if you look in some of our old gorsey rig and furrow fields, you'll see old natural plantain knocking around. It's a species that grows all right on our farm, and we do well with it. Some farms will vary, some farms will find other species that persist better there, I suppose. But no, we view it as, yeah, all singing, all dancing for a few years, a couple of years, really good performance after that, and then we're back to grass. It's tailoring what grass we put in as well. Too many diploids and things that are going to tiller, they're going to affect the persistency a bit there, they're going to smother out. So actually we're going in with hybrids now, so something that's going to match the potential that we can get in the yield from these sort of herb legume contents in the first few years. Something that's going to give us a really good early bite as well. Having them hybrids in there, they're going to be growing earlier on in the season and better on the shoulders. And then actually when they die out after a few years with some of these other species, that low rate of diploid is going to start to have tillered and filled in that layer a bit more. And work in progress, but it seems to be working quite well now, that system.
Sounds good. Just on that note, can I ask a question? Some people have had issues with like frost killing off the plantain, and that just seems to wipe it out. And have you not had frost where have you not had those issues?
Just the tips. We get frost damage on it, but it doesn't kill it. So we go for a grazed pre-lammin. So at the minute, I'm holding. That's where I've got my high yield on. Is these younger sort of multi-species swards? I say we've got the hybrids in and stuff, and a lot of plantain. We see plantain yield really well early season, but it will always have that frost damage on it. So cell grazing pre-lammin with the twins is a good way to reset that sward. Take all the winter sort of growth and winter death off it, so then sort of the frost damage on them leaves and what sort of curled up and shriveled a bit, but we generally don't see it dying back too bad. And we say they'll be under snow sometimes for a few weeks, sometimes for several, but we've not been too bad. We don't get really hard frost, also put them right on the top of the hill where we are here, so it's not really a frost pocket, so it's not prolonged, but no, we'll see damage from it. But I don't know if nipping it off early season helps as well. I don't know if it's left there with dead leaves, if that would promote more dying, but no, we'll go over certainly sort of the next week when we get them twins on the rotation, they'll go over them lays just to nip off all that winter growth and just provide some fresh stuff in the spring.
Brilliant. Poppy, one for you. How far can you push early weaning? So we have got, say we've got twins on the ewe hog, and we know that they're not hitting targets, so the ewe hog do not go, going on as well herself. You had 8 to 10 weeks down, so is there target weights even for that lamb before it's weaned?
Yeah, for hog twins, often you say like 25 kilos is the cut-off for weaning them. I don't know if James will disagree. But yeah, what, do you disagree? Because you
Yeah, so again, on these herb legume days, Paul Kenyon, is that
Kenyan, yeah, I
Massey?
think, yeah.
Yeah, I remember met him it must be 2014. I was out there just before we started doing all the stuff for plantain. They were running trials when they were weaning at 17 kilos. So looking at a scenario, I suppose a bit like the year just been in 2018, when you didn't have good enough pasture growth on farm, you maybe had some of these diverse swards that were still producing all right in the drought. And actually, they looked at the comparison of leaving on mum on a grass-based sward, putting them with mum onto these herb legume lays, and then weaning them onto the herb legume lays. And actually, they saw a lot better improved performance weaning at like sort of 17 kilo mark than leaving them on mum on ryegrass lays.
Okay.
And that did seem young. I mean, 17, you should be that at what, 5 weeks really?
Yeah.
Quite a decent lamb might be there in 3 weeks, but that it does seem very young. But you're looking at sort of scenario planning for when things burn off and you get stuck in. After we had to do a lot of early weaning in 2018 just with the drought, and it was looking that way last year until it started raining as well.
Yeah. Yeah, well, sorry, just back to your general question. Like generally 8 weeks would be the soonest, really. Because then they're still getting a decent amount from milk to that point, and then it's starting to drop off sharply. But it does depend. Like I think if the ewes are in good condition, there's plenty of grass, then you're fine leaving them on. It's just when that grass is in short supply, you're making that process more efficient by prioritizing the good forage to the lambs, and then taking any fit ewes out of the system and putting them onto rougher ground or less pasture. So it's just a means, it's a tool to help prioritize the lambs.
Absolutely, it's that pasture availability, isn't it?
Yeah.
If pasture's plentiful, is in front of them, you could weed whenever you want them bloody weed. As soon as their lambs are competing with their mums, like they're going to be dropping their day live again. What we said, like, is it 80% of their intake up to 8 weeks is from milk, but at 8-week weights, 80% of their lambs intake is now from pasture. So if mum's competing them for every blade of grass in the field, get rid of mum because she's nicking that 80% of the diet that lamb has.
But this is where monitoring growth rates helps as well. Like, I think there was an AHDB target. If they're growing less than 150 grams a day, after 8 weeks, wean them. It just gives an indication that they're not doing well.
Yep, they're done. We've got maybe time for a couple more questions. So this one, they're kind of two similar ones. Do you know the percentage of sheep that go on to have 5 or 6 crops as lambs of the hog versus shearlings? I suppose the other question would be, do you lose a year on the other end for the lamb of the hog?
It's a good question.
It is.
Yeah, that's so what we're doing with Innovis, like that's all collected. We've got a PhD student using all of our data, looking at that exact thing. A guy called Tom Clough did a PhD on it a few years ago, but he was less on longevity. But he has just started on the Challenge Sheep project, looking at scenario modeling for farms based on what they're collecting there through the project. And that project essentially is looking at that exact question. So yeah, there's a PhD using the data, and Challenge Sheep are looking to actually quantify this. Really, when we've got into decent performance on these hogs was when we sort of had that swap over Innovis Genetics. So them embryos are 2014-15 born. We've not got old enough ewes really to be able to quantify exactly how. You need to see the lifetime of these animals to be able to see when and why they've been culled out of the system. But the data's all there, and yeah, there's a few people looking at it to hopefully have quite a meaningful sort of answer to that. Better than the one I can give you anyways.
You have to do the PhD. There is the concept of breeding fatigue. You know, if you going too hard, if you're making them produce too many crops, does that affect their lifespan? And it's something, we need more research on.
I think a big part of maybe how you manage them as ewe lambs and shearlings and getting targets. And
yeah, of course you've got to manage them well, but it might be with all the will in the world, you're still taking a year off the other end.
Yeah, but then if you look at the sort of weaning weights per age group of ewes, that's what it says cattle. Like when they get old, that will drop their milk yields, dropping in sort of year 5, 6, 7. So that 8-week weight's dropped because mum hasn't got as much milk. So that subsequently hits every other waypoint from then onwards. So actually, what point should ewes be leaving a system? If you think, oh well, I'm having to cull them at 6 instead of 8. If actually them last 2 years have been pretty shit at rearing lambs, is there a benefit of having them rearing well a year early as a hog and then pulling them out the system and probably got a better cull value on them as well? Potentially.
Tricky, isn't it, to look at longevity, really?
Yeah, and these EBVs have been developed, but it's longevity. It's a long thing to discover. You've got to wait until it dies to start getting an EBV on it. So it's not a quick trait to start getting estimated breed values for. Genomic data and stuff helps for early identification, but actually for building up that database, it's one of the slower traits to start quantifying.
Dead on. One last quick question. It's quite a big topic. Poppy, in terms of forage crops pre-lambing with triplet bearing ewes, are you alright to take them right to the point of lambing, say on Swedes and silage?
All right.
When do you need to start putting in cake? Do you take them off? What's the
cut-off? I mean, if I was being really risk adverse, I would, from scanning, I'd manage them separately. It depends how prone you are to triplets, I guess. I mean, not to triplets, to prolapses. And also, sorry, I'm talking more like the conventional type systems, but certainly not in the last 6 weeks for triplets. I'm talking triplets. Oh, you're laughing at me, James.
You wouldn't have triplets on winter grazing 6 weeks pre-lambing.
I'm talking Swedes and root crops.
Yeah, I just pulled my triplets off 3 weeks pre-lambing off the beat last week, so no prolapses though, so that was all right.
Well, that's it. I mean, if you're particularly worried about prolapses in your triplets, is what I'm getting at. Yeah. Because there is, for unknown reasons, there is a risk factor of grazing Swedes and prolapses in some systems, and then there's the risk factor with triplets and prolapses. So
again, there'd be a lot of quantity of feed going in them if they're on the fodder beat. Like it's trying with the varieties, what they 14 to 17% dry matter. So there's actually quite a lot of content they're eating each day. And I say if they've got good condition, which they potentially have, especially on something like fodder beat, same I'd imagine on Swedes as well, they could be fit and eating quite a bit as well, which is I think where the issues can really come from, isn't it? Once the lambs start growing.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys. I think we'll call it a day on the questions. I've just got a couple more slides from myself before we wrap up. And just to say as well, if you've enjoyed tonight and would like to see more on a similar topic, we've now got a web page on the FAS website. If you just Google Sustainable Sheep Systems FAS, it'll pull up, and there you can view our previous events, which have been to date. We've had Dowie Jones speaking about breeding and feeding for sustainable sheep systems. We've had Mary Young, SAC's nutritionist, talking about late lactation feeding of ewes. We'll have this one, which will go up shortly. And also coming up, we've got a strategic worming webinar on the 27th of May. That's with Heather Stevenson of SIUC Vets and Jim Logan at Untitled Farm. Where they'll be discussing strategic, sustainable use of wormers, so not just optimising performance, but also looking at how you can limit implemented resistance building up. It's a lot of interesting stuff there. In July, we're going to have a land marketing webinar, and in September, we're going to have a couple of excellent farmers in to discuss transitioning to outdoor lambing, the opportunities and also where the challenges and the pitfalls there as well, and how they've managed it. So we hope to see you guys there. And that's us for tonight. Thank you for joining, and thank you to both our guests. It's been brilliant. And thank you and good night. Have a good evening.